Okay, here goes. There's been a lot of love for this interview. He's a man of our own childhood. Test for Australia with a best of 7 for 27. Shield for the Blues. 412 first-class wickets to boot. A very famous figure, a perennial figure across Sydney Test cricket. Not Sydney grade cricket, Sydney Test cricket.
Correct.
And a multi-decade broadcasting career, taking in Sydney Weekender. But more importantly, for our own childhood, Gladiators, then Who Dares Wins. Michael Roy Whitney, welcome to the Grade Cricketer.
I knew Who Dares and Gladiators was going to get brought up. It's just, people still talk to me every day, particularly about Who Dares Wins. I mean, but look, boys, the start of that intro, a lot of love. That's what it's all about. I've loved my cricket. I loved making Who Dares and Glads and Sydney Weekender, which I'm still doing up here in Sydney. So it's been an amazing, near on 40-year journey, and I'm still enjoying it.
It's amazing. There's a lot to cover here, Whit, and I will call you Whit if that's okay. But
absolutely, Whit. No drama.
Tell us. We start at the same place. Tell us about your relationship to grade cricket.
Well, when I was growing up, I grew up behind Maroubra Beach in Sydney in a suburb called Matraville, and the dominant grade club was the Randwick Cricket Club, and I played in the South Sydney Juniors just with my mates until I was about 17. I played under 12s, and then you sort of got into a C or a B grade with a couple of old guys that just wanted to play on a Saturday afternoon on the mats and have a 7 or 8 schooners before they went home. Of course, we weren't old enough then to do that, but that's what they used to do. When I was about 17, I was playing on the mats one afternoon, and there was an older gentleman playing for Marcellin, and all the guys were younger, our age, and this guy was like in his 40s, but we found out later he was one of the dads, and he coached that side, and his son played. Anyway, I give it to him on the match this day, running in, bounced the kahunas out of him and bowled really quick. Out at Pioneer Park at Malabar, yeah. And that night, he rang up the secretary. What I didn't know was he'd played first grade for Randwick. He'd made double centuries and centuries. He'd been a really, really good player in his youth. And he rang the secretary at Randwick and said, there's this maniac running around in the South Sydney Juniors competition with an afro, left-handed fast bowler, and he's really quick, and you should get him down to Randwick to play lower grades or whatever if he wants to play. So that secretary started ringing my house, and I kept saying no. I wanted to go surfing on a Saturday morning down the beach and play with my mates on Saturday Arvo on the mats. It was good competition, and that was about all I thought about. But he rang this one Saturday morning. I had my surfboard waxed up. If it had been 10 minutes later, I would have been gone. And I remember hearing my mum answer the phone and say, yes, he's here. Yes, he will be there, Mr. Gardner, up at Snake Park. Yep. And it was about the third grade game of the 76-77 season, and 2 bowlers had pulled out of a fourth grade game on the morning. So I said to my mum, I've got no long whites, I've got no bowling boots, nothing. This is a turf wicket, because I played in the school cricket there at Snake Park. And they said, they've got a bag of spikes for you, and I've already phoned Mrs. Martin. That was the mother of a mate of mine. He was the only bloke I knew had a long pair of whites.
Right.
And I borrowed them, rode my push bike the 3 kilometres up to Snake Park in Maroubra, played there, opened a bag of spikes, a pair fitted me, and I took 4 for 16 on the day, bowled about 10 overs, and that was the start of my grade career. I mean, from that day on, I was so blown away that I was playing A, grade cricket, and B, that I'd actually taken a few wickets. I got home that night, and my mum has always said the look on my face when I rode my push bike back to Matraville that night was just amazing, and that was the start of my love affair with grade cricket.
You obviously, and you stayed in grade cricket for a number of years as well, because you've gone on to be president of said club, the Randwick Cricket Club, and there's been some amazing names that have played for Randwick in the last sort of decade or so. I mean, there was a team that had Horitz, Kawaja and Kadich all on the same side, but also most recently, and probably most famously, Dave Warner switched from East to Randwick, and he played, when was that, last year, 2 years ago?
A couple of years ago.
2 years ago, during the time that him and Stephen Smith were banned.
That's right.
They could only play club cricket.
So,
and there was a lot of interest in that year, let me tell you. It was amazing.
I'm sure, I was going to ask, it's sort of become less and less over the last years where the international players are playing so much cricket now. They barely play state cricket, let alone club cricket now. But when guys like those names, especially a guy like Dave Warner, even though it was for a band, I mean, what's it like around the club when those guys are around? I mean, was Dave, giving throwdowns to fifth graders? Was he helping out in the barbecue on the weekend, doing covers on a Tuesday night?
All of that. I got asked consistently over that summer, how's he going? And look, I've known David since he was a kid. Him and Usman Khawaja played in for the Coastal Cricket Club, which is one of the junior clubs that's under our sort of tent, So I'd seen them come up, and then he decided to go and play for East. He probably should have played for us. We were his local club. And then he did come back. But look, that season, and he was unbelievable. I mean, he never missed training. He turned up and coached Woolworth's Big Blast coaching clinics. We were having a clinic at Coogee one day for young girls, and we thought we were going to get about 20, and about 45 turned up. David was driving by, saw that we were short of a couple of coaches, pulled up and coached there for an hour and a half, unannounced. He averaged 90 across the whole season. That's T20s, Belvedere Cup, one-day cricket. At training, some of the young blokes just couldn't believe the level that he trained at. And when I was asked about that, I said, look, it doesn't matter whether he's playing Test cricket, Shield cricket, or for his club. That's the level he plays at. So it lifted the club. And to have him in the dressing room for the season, I was in there a couple of times, and the young first graders saying, oh, when Jimmy Anderson's doing this, or when so-and-so's doing that, or what's it like batting with Glenn Maxwell when you're playing one day. And he just, mate, never, ever balked at a question, told them everything, gave them all this information. The big moment for me, Bart, was at Coogee Oval in the second half of the season. We played Sutherland in a one-day game at Coogee, and Steve Smith was playing. Shane Watson was playing for them. Austin Moore, Steve Ward, young bloke, was playing for them. We had David, Daniel Sams, Sanger, Adam Semple, all those really, really good cricketers, and Smith in their side and Warner in our side. There was about 8,000 people that come to Coogee over the day, and there was a constant crowd there of 4,000 or 5,000 to watch a grade semi-final. Austin Moore hit a 6, the third last ball of the last over to win the game for Sutherland, and that game's still being talked about 2 years down the track because there were international first-class cricketers playing. So I've always said we need to have these guys back just for a couple of rounds, 2 or 3 or 4 rounds every year, to inspire the kids in grade cricket, to show them what you need to do to play that level, and to give the local crowds an opportunity to watch them play. It was just the best day. It was a historic day for both clubs.
I suppose you're talking there, Whit, about some of the shinier elements of grade cricket, what it can look like at first grade level when the internationals are there, great facilities, 2 coastal teams, Sutherland and Randwick Petersham. Take us into the bowels of grade cricket, in the late 70s when you were coming through for Randwick, before it had merged with Petersham. What was it like going to the nets there for Randwick, or early 80s? Can you run us through some of the conversations, just the culture and the vibe of grade cricket in that era?
Yeah, look, it was very, very different. When I first got down to Randwick, we had an amazing array of players. And look, by the time I got into first grade in 79, the first grade team had John Dyson, who was actually playing for Australia and New South Wales at the time. Alan Turner was our captain. He'd played 15 tests for Australia and was just revered around the club. Ron Crippen had played Shield cricket for New South Wales and was a fantastic opening batsman. We had young guns like Peter Clifford, who went on to play 50 Shield games for New South Wales and Queensland combined. Gary Bensley, one of the leading young all-rounders coming through. We just had this great side. But we were inspired by those guys, and they were all at training. So that year that we got from David Warner, I got that every week. And there was also a bit of a no-dickhead policy at Randwick. If you were mucking around in the nets, or you were hanging around the water bubbler too often, someone would say, hey, if you come down to train, I'll drink water out the bubbler. So I got that message really early, and it was very competitive at training, and the level of grade cricket in those days, because those guys played, and when we played another pretty good first grade, so it also had a sprinkling of first-class cricketers, guys that had played first grade for 10 or 15 years, and they were really, really hard games, which prepared me to go into shield cricket. So, look, a lot of good advice around at the time, a lot of amazing conversations to be able to talk to those guys and say to someone like John Dyson and Alan Turner, who played in the mid to late 70s and Dyson through that period as well, what's it like facing those West Indian fast bowlers who were just starting to rampage around the world? And what are the wickets like? And what's it like in the SCG change room? And they just tell you. And I think it prepared you mentally. You knew where the level was that you had to get to if you wanted to play at that level and perform. And it was fantastic. And as far as the cricket was concerned, I can't remember too many pushover first grade games. They were all really tough, competitive games all around Sydney.
Obviously, a great rite of passage for any Australian cricketer, Whit, is to go to the UK. And you did that. I think you're about 21, 22. You went to play for the Fleetwood Cricket Club, I believe it is, and then you had a few games for Gloucester as well. I mean, what greets a 21-year-old Mike Whitney, from Matraville heading over to play for Gloucester? What happens? What happens there? What does he see?
A lot of guys I'd been playing against and with, some of the guys at Randwick, had been over to play club cricket in the off-season. And I was desperate to go over there. I threw a job in at Qantas a couple of years later to do it a bit more full-time. But at the time, they'd given me 6 months off. I'd just come out of an apprenticeship as a ground engineer. And one of the guys had played at this club called Fleetwood. So they said, we've got this guy that's played a couple of seasons, and I'd also debuted for New South Wales in that previous season, 80-81. I played 4 games for the Blues, and I was desperate to get over there and play club cricket and be a professional. So I signed up for Fleetwood. They paid my airfare over, and they paid me £65 a week. And I was billeted with a 75-year-old man, a 65-year-old woman, Eddie and Edith Funk. Now,
Funks.
Yeah, when he introduced himself, he had a very hard but almost cultured Lancashire accent. And when he said Eddie and Edith Funk, I said, "Can you spell that, please?" And he went, F-U-N-K, Funk. I said, okay. Eddie was very conservative. He was the ex-mayor of Fleetwood. Edith was just the most beautiful person. She passed away a few years ago at age 94, and she became my mother in England. And every time I went there after 1981, I went to Fleetwood and I called in and saw these people. But I got to Fleetwood. I went over with a good mate of mine from Randwick, Peter Devlin, who's now the curator at North Sydney Oval. He was the amateur. It was really different cricket. Some of those wickets you can stick your thumb in and it'll go right in. I mean, some of the early games in the wet, I could only run up 3 or 4 steps bowling into a mountain of sawdust on these wickets. The ball was wet. It was a different ball. So you had to learn really quickly. And I've also got to say, I was 22, and there was a good time to be had as well, gentlemen, let me tell you. But out of the blue, I was at home. Another phone call, that Lyle Gardner phone call at my mum's place that day changed my life. So did this one. I just happened to be home and the phone rang, and Edith said to me, "Can you pick the phone up?" And she answered it like this: Fleetwood 2791. That was the phone number. So I picked it up and went, Fleetwood 2791. And this voice went, "Is that you, Widow?" And I went, "Yeah." He said, "This is Greg Geese." Now, I'd played a couple of shield games with Greg Geese, and he was on an SO scholarship at Gloucestershire. I went, "Yeah, Geese." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Mike Proctor and this guy called Brian Brain, who was a seamer who'd taken 1,000 wickets in first class cricket, have both broken down. They're looking for a replacement. I mentioned you. Can you come down for a trial?" So I rang the Fleetwood chairman, and he said, "Yes, you can, but you have to play for us on the Saturday, and if we've got a one-dayer on the Sunday. If we're not playing on the Sunday, go and play a John Player League game or midweek first-class cricket, 3-day game." So I got the train down there, and I trialled, and they signed me up, and I then went on to play 2 or 3 games for Gloucester over the next sort of 6 weeks. Then the big one came. where I was actually sitting on the balcony at Cheltenham playing for Gloucester against Hampshire, and another phone call came, and this guy said he was the manager of the Australian cricket team and that I'd been selected in the team to start the 5th test tomorrow. So I said, fuck off, imbecile, and hung the phone up. Fair dinkum. I thought it was a mate of mine turning me up. Because, of course, the news had said that Lawson and Hogg were injured and this 5th test at Manchester. The phone rang back 30 seconds later and the bloke said, Michael, this is Fred Bennett, the manager of the Australian cricket team. I said, I'm really sorry for swearing, Mr. Bennett, but I thought it was a Gia. He went, get in the car now, drive up to Manchester, come up to the Grand Hotel, and I'll meet you in room 242 as soon as you get here. So I did. And when I got up to that room, and it was like a 2-hour drive, and my mind was just freaking out. I can't actually remember that drive now.
Yeah.
And got to that room, and there was Fred, dearest person you've ever met in your life, and Kim Hughes sitting on his bed in the manager's room saying, well, you're playing tomorrow. You're not 12th man. You're actually playing. You're going to bowl first change after Dennis Lilly and Terry Haldeman open the bowling.
God.
And I looked at him, and this is what I do remember. You know how your baggy green gets presented on the ground and you know what your number is. No one knew what their number was in those days. We knew we had a number. But I remember Fred Bennett, he had a couple of big cardboard boxes in his room. And after I'd had this 10-minute talk with Kim, Fred went, there's your short sleever. You better have 2 short sleevers and a long sleever. And there's your baggy green. And just frisbeed it across the room for me to catch. And that's how I got my first baggy green. So times have changed, but it was just, it changed my life again. There's 3 phone calls I've talked to you about that if I hadn't have taken those phone calls, my life would be very, very different today.
Oh, it's an incredible story, Mike. I have to ask, once he frisbeed you that baggy green, what was the weirdest thing you did in it? Did you sleep in it that night or shower in it?
I remember looking, well, they said, here's your room key, take all your gear up to this room. So I did. And in those days, you shared rooms. You roomed with someone. The captain and the vice captain got their own room, but all the players shared. I go into this room and there's all this gear laying around. And I think, how am I rooming with? And there were 6 or 7 New South Welshmen on that Ashes tour. So I had a few mates there that I knew. And there was this port, leather-crafted, beautiful bag in the corner. And I walked over and looked at it, and stamped on it was DK Lilly. And I went, oh, no. And 5 minutes later, seriously, I'd only met Dennis once during that Shield season. I was 12th man for a game that they played. And he walked in, and fair dinkum, I stood at attention. Like I was a soldier. I didn't know what to do. And he said, no, Mike, you're good, mate, no drama, so Mr. Liver, no, Dennis. He was so fantastic to me during that whole tour. I stayed on board for the whole tour. It was amazing. And to answer your question about that baggy green, I reckon I only wore it 2 or 3 times at most. I just put it away and always wore a fielding hat. It wasn't a thing like it is now. I mean, Stephen, when he was captain of Australia, bought in the thing, and we all wear it on the first session of, when we go out to bowl. Those things weren't around. Stephen brought a lot of that stuff in, recognition of the number, presenting the cap on the ground, wearing it out on the first session of that day. They were all Steve Waugh's ideas, but that doesn't mean to say that the thing wasn't special and sacred. I mean, I've still got it, and every now and again I pull it out and look at it, and I just shake my head. Just shake my head, think, wow, remember that when that was frisbeed across the room to you? That day changed my life completely, and the next day I ran out and became the 313th Australian Test cricketer, and your life changes.
Well, after your career, Whit, you actually changed a lot of people's lives in your broadcasting career. I'm reaching for a segue there, but I'm talking about specifically one of the great programs in Australian history, Who Dares Wins. That's what I really want to talk about. And obviously,
you've been talking about it all morning.
I have been talking about it all morning, and I've reached out to a few.
Or have you been talking about Tanya?
Well, that's actually why we've got you on. This is a gateway for me to get Tanya Zanetta's phone number. Yeah, that's right. But I mean, I was talking to my sister last night and just reminiscing on some of the great some of the great dares. There was one where you were down at Sydney Harbour and there was some people on lunch break. This is in the 90s, and it was $50 to jump into Sydney Harbour fully clothed. People drinking
in the 90s.
In the 90s, lot of money back then. But there was the Wheat Bix challenge. There was people drinking ostrich eggs.
I remember a sheep's eyeball. Eat a sheep's eyeball for $50. Yeah, there was some really weird things. Some really weird things going on.
That's why I was going to ask you. So, what was there anything? Was there an incident or like a challenge or whatever that really stands out in the mind of like, well, that was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen?
Oh, yeah,
the whole
every
show?
Week. Look, there'd never been a show made like that, and they were the real early days of reality TV. I mean, that term didn't exist then. We got nominated in a couple of Logie categories, but it was for entertainment. The word reality TV didn't exist. So it was well before its time. And to go out on the street and dare people for money as live, I mean, of course, we filmed it, went back, got edited, but it was as live. It was like you were there.
Yeah.
Had never been done before. I'd worked at the ABC with one of the blokes who thought up the idea. There were two English guys. And he rang me up, and I'd already started at 7 doing Sydney Weekender. And he rang me up and said, we've got this show, mate, and we think you can do it. And we're gonna talk to Channel 7. If they buy it, because you're already there, we want you to host the show. So within a couple of weeks, that all happened. And next minute, we're out on the street daring people. And as the show went on, of course, what was a big deal in Series 1 was nothing in Series 3 or 4. So they just kept having to up the ante all the time. And look, I think there was a bit lost in translation as well, because that last dare, the main dare, where if you succeeded in the main dare, you won a trip around the world.
Yeah.
The people who wrote in were generally the families, and they would tell us that these people, my husband's a great man, great father, a great uncle, great grandfather, blah, 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 really hard worker, beautiful person, but he needs a break and we need to challenge him. He's getting lazy and his greatest fear is this. So we knew what their greatest fear was. Because people would come up to me on the street, go, I'd do any of them dares on the show. And I go, yeah, mate, yeah, all the time. I used to get guys coming up to me going, I'm former SAS, I'll go on that show and do any dare you want me to do.
Yeah.
And I go, but man, we don't want guys like you on the show.
Yeah.
We actually want the bloke who lives next door, who's an accountant, who's getting a bit lazy, and we know that he's shit scared of heights, so we're going to put him up in a helicopter and ask him to bungee jump out of it. And that's the way it worked. We found out what your greatest fear was, and we exposed that. And what did that do for people? Well, I'll tell you what, there was a number of people that succeeded in those dares, and some of them ended up on the speaking circuit doing motivational talks, stuff like this. It was really unbelievable, the effect that show had. We finished making it in about 97, 98, and as you quite rightly said, boys, people are still talking about that show and asking me on a weekly basis, oh, you're going to dare me, or what about that dare, or where's Tanya? We love Tanya. So, yeah, all the blokes asked me that. Tanya was fantastic, mate. Tanya, believe it or not, now, I don't know how many people know this. I have triplets that are 26 years old, a boy and two girls. Tanya had twins about 5 years ago. So between us, we've got triplets and twins. What was in the water? And who dares win?
And for $50, we're going to find out, Whit.
Yeah, but Tanya still looks the same. She is gorgeous. We talk a couple of times a year. That show for her launched her into superstardom. She went and did Bollywood. She lived in England for 10 years and was the face of beer commercials and Nike shoes and all this sort of stuff. She did great out of it. A real go-getter, Tanya. Love her.
One last thing, Whit, and I've asked this to a few people before, but obviously we know. No, it's not about Gladiator. It's about sandpaper. So the affair's completely over, as you know, consigned to the history books, fully accept only 3 people knew what was going on. No one else had a clue what was going on. They never used those tactics in previous series against England.
Wolf Lehman didn't know what was going on.
He didn't know.
Didn't have a clue.
No one knew.
Given literally everything's better in your era, what was the best way to secretly get the ball talking, aside from 80 grit sandpaper down the pants?
Little bit of Vaseline in your shoelaces always went well on the shining side. You know, bit of UV suntan cream on the fire. Look, everything's been used.
Yeah.
This is the thing. I got asked about it immediately. Of course, I said ball camping's been going on since day one, and will go on until the last game of cricket's ever played. When someone's either lifting the seam, maybe scratching the ball. Look, it really come to awareness with us when the Pakistanis started swinging the ball Irish, and we couldn't work out how that was happening. And then we got told, you know, some of the subcontinent guys are actually scratching it with a bottle top, or they've got a long nail and they're roughing up this one side of the ball.
It's just really good wrist position. It's just that solid.
Just
wrist release point.
It's really good wrist position. So, yeah, look, it's been going on a long time. Have I ever ball tampered? Well, you know, if cleaning out a bit of grass in the seam and trying to lift the seam back into its original position is ball tampering, maybe I'm guilty of that. I've never rubbed any substance on it. I mean, I was a big enough sweater and played with Merv Hughes, who's the biggest sweater in the history of the world, so we didn't need much substance to rub it on there and try and shine it up. But, yeah, it was an amazing whole episode that I just couldn't work out how they didn't think they were going to get seen with 37 cameras at the ground now. But when I played, there were 6 cameras at the ground and only 4 worked at the one time or something. So it was really crazy. But I'd also heard, look, and I'll give you this. I spoke to people after that series and they said that series was brutal. And when you go to South Africa, I mean, they're like us. They'll fight until the last breath, the South Africans. But the crowds over there, man, and the press and the people, and we'd really been given it. And there were suspicions that they'd been ball tampering in the first couple of tests as well, or doing something to the ball. So that's not to legitimise what we did. That's not to say what we did was right. What we did was wrong, and people suffered for a year. But it was a really nasty, volatile series. And, well, you saw, you know, a couple of guys nearly punching on, David Warner and who was it, DeCock, going into the race. I mean, I've never seen that. It never goes off the field, man. You can be abused on the field. It never gets to the point where you're punching on in the race going into the dressing room. So when I saw that, I thought, ooh, man, there's some ugly words being traded out there, and it was really vicious and a really heavy series. But you just can't take sandpaper out onto the ground and scratch the ball on it and not get caught and think that it's okay. It wasn't okay. It was crazy.
Mike, thanks so much for your time, mate. Very, very generous. Really appreciate it, and all the great work you do in grade cricket.
Good on you, Sam and Ian. My pleasure, boys. Lovely to talk to you.